Welcome back, AP. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and our continuing discussion of the expansion of the Reformation period into England, right? We are now talking about the expansion of the Reformation and how all these different stories are kind of working in parallel of each other. Now, speaking of working in parallel and really getting this stuff and understanding it, I really want to give a quick shout out to all the 7 girls that came and saw me during S period on Friday because I wanted to make sure that they really understood everything, right? Shout outs to Abby, Worcester, Kelsey, Carissa, Callie, Alexandra, and who's the one that I know? Oh, Chloe. Yeah, so thank you so much for coming in and stopping by and giving us a chance to talk about a couple of different things. And one of the biggest things that the girls that were actually there, we're kind of going through and trying to understand a little bit better is, all this stuff is happening at the exact same time, right? So just to give you kind of a heads up, 1547 is going to be when Henry VIII dies. That's going to be leading into the end of Martin Luther's life, and also when he ends up dying soon after, right? So you have to understand, all these people, all these stories, all this stuff is existing at the same time as one another, okay? Literally, Charles V, the guy that we talked about, that was the ruler of the Holy Roman Empire, the 19-year-old emperor that called the Diet of Worms, met Martin Luther and has also met Henry VIII. And his aunt is Catherine of Aragon, Henry VIII's first wife, right? They all know each other. They've been at a party together. You know what I'm talking about? There are people in the room. They have personalities. They have little quirks and stuff like that. Henry had his big stinky leg that ended up killing him in the long run. And then also, of course, we talked about his son, who did live for just a hot second, but ended up dying from tuberculosis, okay? So the big thing about it, though, is if you are confused about anything, please do not feel any kind of way about coming and asking for help, because trust me, I know this stuff. I can pull up maps, I can draw it, and also, quick thing as well for a study tool, I also posted 2 family trees onto your Google Classroom. If you want to work through them a little bit and just kind of see how all these people are related, okay? All the things that are marked in black are relationships through marriage. All the red stuff means that they are related by blood, okay? So look, big thing about it, though, is let's pick off where we left off in class. We were talking about the reign of Edward VI, right? We started talking about the reign of Edward VI. We talked about a couple of little things about him, but we mainly got into the fact that he actually came to the throne at a very young age, right? He was really young when he came to the throne. I think he was about 6 years old, give or take. And it's important to understand something very key here. Whenever somebody is super young and doesn't have the ability to rule on their own, they typically have a regent, right? And so the regents actually ruled for Edward this entire time. And it was during this entire process that he almost married a 7-month-old, right? Known as the rough wooing, okay? That 7-month-old is going to be important later in the slip. Her name is Mary, Queen of Scots, right? Now, so biggest thing about it, though, also, he tried to give the throne to his cousin on his deathbed. He didn't rule for a very long period of time. He only ruled for about 6-ish years, right? A little bit more than that, but really only 2 of them actively because he was actually of age and it was actually when he was really healthy, right? But he was a very sickly person, got very random illnesses throughout his entire life, and tuberculosis ends up being the one that ends up killing him, right? But a big thing that does happen is there's the solidification of Anglicanism underneath him, right? They issued this thing called the Book of Common Prayer, and the Book of Common Prayer does become pretty important. Put a little star next to that or something like that, okay? And what the Book of Common Prayer basically did is it standardized all masses within the new Anglican Church. For example, underneath this Book of Common Prayer, they changed it from Sir Thomas Cromwell's idea of masses in Latin but English Bibles to masses in English Bibles, right? Trying to make the faith a little bit more Protestant and a little less Catholic, right? Now, that's going to be a key concept going forward a little bit, is about how much Catholicism does the actual church have inside of it. That's something we talked about in S period as well, and we'll get into the origin of those people called the Puritans here in a little bit as well. But getting into it, though, Edward VI is going to die. He gives the throne to Lady Jane Grey. She only rules for about 9 days until a coup is actually launched by none other than Mary Tudor, right? Now, the Third Secession Act is going to be the thing that gives Mary Tudor the power to actually overthrow Lady Jane Grey and place herself on the throne. That Third Secession Act actually set up a secessionary process whereby the girls would get the throne after Edward died. Now, most people thought that Mary would be gone or married off to somebody else or wouldn't be nearby or possibly even dead because she was in her 30s by this point, right? Now, the Third Secession Act, though, just happened to be an act that did actually have prevalence, and it did put her actually within the claim of the throne, okay? And so what ends up going down is she overthrows Lady Jane Grey, has her executed, also has her husband executed as well. And then the thing about it, though, is she hates her dad. She hates her dad so much. She hates Henry VIII for scorning her mother and sending her off to a monastery for the rest of her life. And then also Mary went in tow with her. So Mary was a fervent and angry Catholic, furious against what has happened in England and really desperately wants to bring England back to Catholicism, right? And she is known, of course, as Mary Tudor, and she has the very short reign of only about 5 years, right? Now, she has a very, very much more famous nickname we'll get into here in a second, but she tried to pull England back to Catholicism, right? By appointing several different ministers underneath her, they try to make fervent attempts to bring England back to Catholicism. Now, interesting little point upon this entire thing is, do you remember that title that Henry VIII, her father, actually earned for himself when he wrote that book, Defending the Seven Sacraments, when he was kind of lashing out against Luther before he created the Anglican Church? That idea of the defender of the faith, right? Actually, the Pope awards the same award to Mary Tudor as well when she tries to bring England back to Catholicism. And in this entire process, she wanted to try and find herself a nice Catholic husband that actually owned a lot of land and could exert a lot of power. And she does. She actually gets married to a man by the name of Philip II. Wait a minute! Do we know Philip II? We do know Philip II. Philip II is the son of Charles V. That's right, none other than the Spanish leader of the new Spanish branch of the Habsburgs. Now, Philip II is a young man who apparently at the time also was going to be a really good catch for Mary Tudor. He was only 27, while she was 37 when they actually got married, okay? The thing about it, though, in the long run, so you understand some things about Philip as well, is that he came to power, and when he marries Mary Tudor, this freaks out the Parliament, right? Now, in the next unit, we're going to talk about Parliament a lot, all right? So you just need to know kind of who they are. Now, in the background, behind the kings and queens of, like, England, okay, that you need to know, is they have to work with the legislative body. Okay, and that legislative body, of course, was established by none other than the document known as the Magna Carta. So the thing about it, though, in the long run, is that document is going to establish a legislative branch that limits the power and the authority of the king a little bit. And so they have to actually approve certain things. There are certain powers the Parliament had. The Parliament could do things like regulate tax money. They could actually raise taxes legally, whereas the kings and queens could not, right? So there's actually a limited monarchy in England, even though the power of them is growing and they're starting to dabble a lot in religious intensity. Now, the Parliament, though, did change the laws a little bit and made it so this guy, Philip II, the new husband of Mary Tudor, would only be king by title, right? And so if something ever happened, and if, Mary dies before they can have a child, then he literally loses his right to the throne, okay? So it's important to understand that. So does that send, of course, Mary and Philip into a frenzy of trying to get pregnant in those 5 years? It does, right? But of course, the thing about it is they had a pretty strained relationship. It was a little bit of a sham of a marriage and stuff like that. He spent most of his time back in Spain. He even requested that royal documents be written in Spanish in England, which is super ironic. But she, of course, asked him for a lot of advice, and they kept a very, very close diplomatic relationship, even though the romantic one wasn't that great. It was so rough as well that Mary so badly wanted to have a child, because if she could actually bear a child, that means that King Philip will never lose the title to the throne of England, and it will solidify him as being more a part of the English hierarchy, right? Because that means that the next reign or the next ruler is right there, and he would be the father of that prince or princess, right? The thing about it, though, is Mary never got pregnant. Mary never got pregnant. She actually, though, had 2 phantom pregnancies, right? Not even kidding, y'all. Mary thought and wanted to be pregnant so badly so she could continue this new line of rulership that she literally, her menstrual cycle stopped, her stomach swelled, but when the doctors came in to check on the baby while it was still in gestation, literally, they listened to it and they're like, yo, old girl, there's nothing in there. There is nothing in there. We're just like, it's like nothing. It's empty, right? So literally, she had 2 of them also. And the last one happened right before she died, right? So going into it, though, you need to understand as well, is she did earn the moniker during this time period of of course, by the name of Bloody Mary, right? She earns that nickname because she had a few hundred Protestants executed, and about 1,000 of them are going to flee. Now, I say she was bad at being Bloody Mary because I think the name Bloody Mary insinuates that she killed thousands, but she actually killed just under 300. Now, an interesting little fact of the matter is, though, is a lot of these Protestants that she tried to have burned at the stake, by the way, that's her preferred method of actually executing these people, was, of course, in public and burning at the stake. One of the most famous ones that actually was killed was the Archbishop of Canterbury underneath Edward, her younger brother, by a man by the name of Thomas Cranmer, right? A lot of Thomases. Thomas More, Thomas Cromwell, Thomas Cranmer. But Thomas Cranmer also ends up dead, burned at the stake by Mary Tudor because he refused to give up his Protestant ideals. But this intensity, this scariness that should, of course, scare Scary Mary. Maybe we should actually rename her. Scary Mary, maybe it actually sounds a little bit better. So the big thing about it is about 1,000 Protestants are going to flee. Now, they actually run away to Switzerland, where they actually meet up with this guy named John Calvin. That, of course, Olivia Worcester brought up in class the other day. She's like, oh, there's a school in the area called John Calvin School. And I'm like, so it's named after this man, right? The Calvinists, though, are going to teach these people that fled from England a lot of different ideals, and when they come back to England, they desperately want to get all the old ideas of Catholicism out of the church, and so they're referred to as trying to purify the church, aka the Puritans. The Puritans are those people that fled under the rulership of Bloody Mary, right? But the thing about it, though, is she is going to die in 1558, so what ends up happening to Philip II's claim to the throne? He loses it, right? He loses his claim to the throne completely, and now he's just the king of Spain all over again. And rulership will then pass to Elizabeth I, okay? We are now entering into a very important time and an important period of history when it comes to the rulership of England and also the progress of England. And it's known as the Elizabethan era, okay? The Elizabethan era, because Elizabeth I, who is a very strong ruler, is going to create a period of progress in England, and she's going to do a lot of this both diplomatically and also both religiously as well. But when Elizabeth I comes back to the throne, the number one thing she wants to do is bring Anglicanism back, right? She wants to actually kind of separate the idea of being like Catholic, and she wants to bring back Protestantism. Because remember, her mother was, of course, Anne Boleyn, who was married underneath the Anglican Church, of course, Henry's second wife, and so she decides to try and bring it back. Now, there's an interesting little facet about Elizabeth as well. She's a moderate politician. You might want to go ahead and write that down. She's a moderate politician. She tries to play both sides really, really efficiently, and something that she begins to notice is that we need to start to begin to separate the church and the state a little bit, right? We need to try and actually make this more less like my politics are here and my religion is over here. Her biggest incoming problem that she's going to have to deal with, though, are these people called the Puritans, right? The Puritans are these people that want to get rid of all these different things that are too Catholic in the Anglican Church. And then you got the Catholics that she knows are now very much there. Lots of them out in Ireland, lots of them up in northern England as well, that actually think that she is not the rightful heir to the throne because she's not Catholic. The Catholics actually support someone else. The Catholics want this woman to come to power instead of Elizabeth I, because technically she is related to the throne and the leadership by blood, because she is the grandniece of Henry VII, Henry VIII's father, right? So the thing about it, and her famous name is Mary Queen of Scots, right? And Mary Queen of Scots is going to become a very important player in this entire story. Mary Queen of Scots does not get a chance to come to power, but she is the Queen of Scotland, right? And as the Queen of Scotland, she is married to a man by the name of Lord Darnley, and she has a son as well that could eventually one day inherit the throne. His name is James, right? The thing about it, though, in the long run is that Elizabeth's a little freaked out because Mary Queen of Scots is still very much around, and the Catholics want her instead of Elizabeth, right? So she's got to figure out how to deal with that, too. Well, the first thing she wants to do is figure out how to play both sides a little bit, right? She decides instead of creating the supreme head of the church, she passes a new version of the Act of Supremacy, basically the Act of Supremacy 2.0, where the leader of England is known as the governor of the church, right? Somebody that is basically there to push different reforms and make sure that the church functions the way it's supposed to, however, is not meant to get swept up into the religious idealism of the entire thing. That instead would be left up to the Archbishop of Canterbury, right? Or the leader of the church itself. Not supreme leader, but of course you understand what I'm saying. As literally with the Act of Supremacy, she is the head of the church. The Archbishop of Canterbury, though, will deal with all the functionality of the church itself, right? So she decides to change that a little bit, and she wants to try and play both sides as much as she possibly can. And now the Mary Queen of Scots thing, though, is going to start blowing up in her face, because a lot of Catholics are going to start having revolts against Elizabeth early on, and they desperately want Mary Queen of Scots to be the one in power, okay? So then there's also this other problem. There are these people called the Dutch, right? Of course, we know the Dutch very well. Something that you need to understand about the Dutch that's going on right now is they're currently fighting a war against none other than Philip II of Spain. All right, so now something that you need to understand is that the Dutch at the time, of course, aka the Netherlands, the people of the Netherlands area, they have converted to Protestantism, and they want to have their own liberated and free country. So they created a war against Philip II that is now colloquially known as the 80 Years' War. Now, this is an interesting moment going down, okay? This is a big crux moment for Elizabeth's early reign, is that as she is trying to separate the politics from the church, she's got Mary Queen of Scots, who all these Catholics want to come to power as the Queen of England, and to unify the two crowns of Scotland and England. And then all of a sudden as well, Mary Queen of Scots kind of falls out of favor with the Scots because her husband shows up dead, okay? Now, we'll talk about that. It's a really, really intense story in class, but Mary Queen of Scots ends up under house arrest because Elizabeth doesn't really know what to do with her. It's still her cousin, and she doesn't want to kill her and stuff like that, but Mary Queen of Scots ends up under house arrest during this entire process when she runs away to England and seeks, what's the word I'm looking for? Sanctuary from her cousin Elizabeth, right? Because literally, her husband was supposed to die in an explosion, apparently, but he showed up stabbed to death and stuff like that. And all the Scottish nobles blamed Mary, and she had to run away. And when she ran away, she ran to none other than Elizabeth to stay safe and stuff like that. And so she's got a little bit of an interesting thing. All the Catholics who want Mary Queen of Scots to actually come into power, she's under house arrest inside of a castle that Elizabeth actually owns, right? So the Dutch, though, the big thing about it as well, is that in this entire process, Elizabeth decides to ally with the Dutch, right? She allies with the Dutch, gives them a lot of different weapons and money and funding and also things like that because she believes that their cause is right. They are Protestants as well, and they are also rebelling against her adversary, Philip II. Because something that you need to understand, Mary, Bloody Mary's husband, Philip II, does not like Elizabeth very much, and also at one point tried to marry her as well. It was like, look, if we get married, I can stay the King of England and stuff like that, and we can keep this whole bad boy going. And she says, no, I don't want to get married to you because I am the Virgin Queen. Something that you need to understand is that Elizabeth I, this lady, never got married, not once. And she would use her her availability, if you will, her availability to get married, her availability to power and the throne itself as a political dictation, as a piece of political diplomacy. She would kind of toy with it all the time, be like, well, if we enter into an allyship, maybe I'll marry one of your princes or something like that. And she would use it constantly as a way to kind of progress all the things that she wanted. And she actually becomes so famous in this entire process that later on, after she dies, a company is founded in her name, and they call it the Virginia Company, right? And the Virginia Company was the same company that started Jamestown, and that's why the state of Virginia is named Virginia, because it's directly named after Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, the woman that never got married. And she refused to marry Philip II, and she allied with the people that are rebelling against him in the 80 Years' War. Oh, on top of everything else, something's going to go down, and Mary Queen of Scots is going to end up executed because apparently there was an assassination attempt on Elizabeth's life. And in the letter, it was addressed to Mary Queen of Scots, right? So Mary, as you can tell, Elizabeth's got a crazy diplomatic situation on her hands. She has to end up executing her cousin and stuff like that, which we'll talk about the whole story with that during our warm-up on, I think it's Monday. I see y'all again on Monday. Yeah, so we'll talk about the crazy execution story and what actually ended up happening and who Mary Queen of Scots is and where the heck she came from and stuff like that. We'll talk about why she picked the Dutch again. We'll review that whole thing, but all you need to know is that in the process of killing Mary Queen of Scots, allying with the Dutch, and refusing to marry this man, Philip II obviously is super upset with Elizabeth. And this is all in her early reign, right? In her early reign, right after starting in 1558, and then eventually runs out in 1603 when she dies, right? So the thing about it is Philip is really upset with her, right? Very upset because you killed the Catholic ally she had, right? You allied with the Dutch in his face, and you wouldn't marry him, and you also took away his kingdomship. So the Spanish decide that they want to launch this thing known as the Spanish Armada. And there's another reason why Philip is really, really upset with Elizabeth as well. It's because a man that apparently Elizabeth secretly may have been dating and stuff like that on the side, because she might have been into pirates. She might have dated Sir Walter Raleigh and this other man by the name of Sir Francis Drake, who was a very, very well-known privateer. So something that you need to understand, when you look at the University of New Orleans, their mascot is called the Privateers, right? Privateers are fancy words for pirates, right? And pirates were called privateers when the English crown would fund them to do illegal things or certain things that actually could violate international law, right? Well, not international law, it didn't really exist at the time. But Francis Drake led several raids on Spanish treasure ships that had tons of silver and gold on them coming in from the colonies. Remember that. Keep that in the back of your mind. We talked about that back in the day when Spain was actually bringing in all this gold and silver away from the colonies, right? And so Philip is so enraged by this whole thing that he plans on sailing several hundred vessels over to England and trying to directly invade England in this event known as the Spanish Armada, right? Now, the Spanish Armada is going to be one of the biggest moments in European history because it's going to pit Philip II, a huge and powerful naval ruler and also ruler in general of colonial administration sites in North and South America, against the new female Queen of England who's refusing to marry anybody and also who has taken England back to Protestantism. So this is a massive moment in history due to the fact that you're now talking about, basically, in essence, you're getting at the idea of, like, you got to understand, wait, what the heck, what am I? But this moment is going to be a delta moment in history, right? So Philip II takes a huge gamble and loses, and he decides to try and do something that no one since, like, William the Conqueror has ever done, and decides to try and invade the island of England directly. Now, something that you need to understand about England is that they're very well known for having a naval prowess. Now, the thing about it that at the time, most people looked at Spain's navy as being bigger, better, faster, and larger, and a lot of it has to do with the type of boats that they actually had. These things known as Spanish galleons, which were really, really big. However, England had a lot of merchant ships and smaller vessels that were lighter and more maneuverable. And so when the Spanish actually show up, they got cornered by these lighter and more maneuverable ships by several different leaders of the English or the English naval fleet. And England is going to use several different tactics to outmaneuver the Spanish and sink their vessels and crush the Spanish Armada decisively in the English Channel in 1586, right? Now, the fire ships is going to be a big one. Apparently, at one point, under the advice of several different, like, actual admirals, privateers, and other things like that, Elizabeth sanctioned the idea of setting old English boats on fire and launching them directly at the Spanish to cause distraction and confusion, which is absolutely insane. Also, when the Spanish originally lost their initial battle against the English, they decided that they were going to try to sail all the way around England, land in Ireland, recruit a loyal Catholic army in Ireland, and then try to invade England directly by land in a massive assault with their 33,000 troops that they had. Now, the thing about it, though, in general, what's going to happen is that their food is going to start going bad as they head around England, over Scotland, and over towards Ireland. And also, they got hit by a massive set of storms that sunk so many of their ships that that Spanish's Armada never even got a chance to land in Ireland. They had to limp their way back to Spain in an embarrassing defeat. And what are the results of this massive thing? This means that, one, the Protestant cause is now solidified, right? A major Catholic ruler has lost to now an officially Protestant nation, that being of England. And also, Elizabeth's fame catapults forward, and she is seen as a monarch of legitimate cause and legitimate depth that literally no one actually can stop. And what we're going to do right now is I'm going to end it right there for y'all, right? That right there is going to be the end of this flip because we talked about a lot of different stuff, including the Spanish Armada and a lot of different little extra things as well. And I want to go ahead and cut this off just so y'all have time to study this, and I also promised that I would keep this one 25 and a half minutes or under just so we could actually understand everything. But during this entire process going into it, the Elizabethan era truly catapults itself forward. So a couple of things to write down about the Elizabethan era is you're going to see the growth of the economy of England, and you're also going to see the founding of several different things that are going to catapult England forward during their cultural explosion following the Spanish Armada. Because they don't really necessarily, following this thing known as the Treaty of London, they don't really have to worry about being directly invaded by the Spanish anymore. They do continue to support the Dutch in the 80 Years' War against the Spanish, but the big thing about it is they're kind of being left alone now, and they're solidified as a naval power that you can't really directly invade by sea assault, right? Now, the thing that goes forward, though, is you see the expansion of the English economy. The best example of that is, guess what gets founded during the Elizabethan era? None other than the British East India Company, monikered and followed after the Dutch East India Company. And that company is granted a monopoly on all goods coming in and out of the East Indies. Now, the last but not least one, you're going to see also an explosion of art and literature during the Elizabethan era. And the best example of that art and literature that explodes during the Elizabethan era following the Spanish Armada is, guess what writer popped up in England and was considered the best playwright by Elizabeth herself? None other than William Shakespeare, right? William Shakespeare was alive while Elizabeth was alive and was writing his very famous plays, none other than Romeo and Juliet, Midsummer Night's Dream, and then also The Merchant of Venice. He writes all of those during the Elizabethan era. But I'm going to cut it off right there. We'll talk about Calvinism and the explosion of the Reformation and get into the Counter-Reformation a little bit in class, but I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.